Hello, hello! I am Ben Pick, and thank you for joining me in Running to Write, where I give questionable writing advice through running metaphors. Well, that's what I normally do here. Today I'm doing a different segment called Should You Read This? This is the long-awaited spoiler-free breakdown of the Calderon series, or as it's better known, the Codex Alera. The 6-part fantasy series was written by Jimbutcher, and he delivered a solid story. The magic is robust with a balance of 6 different elements, starting with the basic 4 of every fantasy: water, earth, fire, and air, and adding in wood and metal. In my opinion, the balance isn't always there, and some of these felt better than others, or the practical applications more varied. However, you'll have to wait for next week with my spoiler-filled review of this and analysis, as the details I'll be describing and the evidence I present comes from events within the actual books, so I don't want to spoil anything here. These abilities are bestowed by elemental beings known as Furies. Furies can take on a lot of different forms, such as a Water Fury becoming a Water Horse, or an Earth Fury becoming a dog shape, or a Wind Fury becoming something like a harpy, where it's this winged creature through a storm. These Furies are also tied to physical locations, such as a river near the crafter's home or a volcano, though they can be summoned to a new place in physical form by the crafter. Thus, crafters tame wild Furies much like Pokemon, and much like Pokemon, there's supposed to be a system where rock beats scissors, which beats paper. Or in this case, Water Furies beat Fire Furies, which beat Wood Furies. It's not quite the same as Pokemon strategy, though it's not far off. Along with being able to summon one or more Furies, the crafter is able to perform secondary magic actions based on one of the 6 elements. For example, water crafters can send messages along the waterways and sense people's emotions. Fire crafters can stoke the flames of people's moods and spread fear across the population. Wood crafters can become invisible. Wind crafters can speed up their senses, so essentially they are slowing down time relative to themselves. And metal crafters can harden their skin and raise their endurance to absorb considerable amounts of pain. Also, earth crafters can sense things through the ground for large distances. There are some wonderfully creative uses of these mechanics. I won't go into the details here because spoilers. There were plenty of times across the series though where I put down the book and just thought, okay, that's pretty cool. This was a fun read, particularly for those of us Jimbutcher fans awaiting our next Dresden Files fix. Although this series is not the Dresden Files and the characters don't have quite as strong personalities, I grew to genuinely like them and care about their struggles. Each of the novels captured my interest early and never let go. From the beginning of book 1, we are thrown into a spy's final exam, which turns out to be a practical espionage test. Rather than show us the spectacle of the magic or its rules, we are introduced and showcased one of the main characters, Amara. She feels like a typical fantasy hero, young, headstrong, brave, and morally good. The story takes place just prior to the action as they go through the plan and set the stage. Names and places are thrown out hard and fast without giving us the time to reconcile what they mean. That's not a detriment when used delicately. This is a common trend within the Codex Alera, where something about the world will be mentioned in passing so we can quickly get to the action. And then it's not until a chapter or 5 later where that detail gets fully explained. It does mean I spent occasional chapters playing catch up to the people, politics, magic, races, and geography. This style of writing is unforgiving, though I did appreciate how quickly we got to the punchy. For example, there is a massive race of anthropomorphic tigers known as the Canem. When they were originally introduced, I thought they were more like cat people and were much less impressive. Though as the series went on, I realized they were 7 to 9 foot tall powerhouses. There was also a race of ice people beyond the wall to the north, and I don't have a good idea of what they physically look like. I think they might be stocky humans wearing animal furs, but they could also be ice elemental fantasy dwarves. I wasn't always sure. The book seemed to take certain physical descriptions, geography, and politics as facts of the world without diving fully into them. This worked as both an advantage and a detriment. In the middle of a fight or during rising tension, it was fine so long as I didn't think too deeply about what was going on, and was patient with the story to allow it to unfold and answer my questions. Eventually. However, this led to difficulties in picturing the action, and forced me to readjust how I imagine the characters and events taking place. By no means was this a deal breaker, but it was a little off-putting to not understand a fight scene, or to halt a tense build-up moment to explain the region or politics or world building so that I, the reader, wouldn't be lost. Another downside is that the series regularly asks us to care about characters without doing that initial investment to get us emotionally attached. In the first book, I didn't immediately care about Amara, yet was forced to because she was thrown into a life and death dilemma. This caused simplified storytelling to be applied, where reversals and all the various triple crossing was predictable. I was taking notes while I was reading this, and a lot of my predictions, based on few details of initial interactions with characters, turned out to be true. Characters were thrown into danger before we got to know them, and without a lot of that flavoring for their personality, these were just events happening to strangers. It's not as bad as dropping us into a chapter 1 battle scene, though it's not far removed. On the other hand, plenty of characters were flushed out and developed in intriguing ways. Great time and care was given to the very cast, many of whom were friendly rivals or outright frenemies. This allowed several villains to get some kind of redemption arc, while others rejected being anything other than terrible people. They became more than one-dimensional, and the layers Jimbutcher wove into each character was impressive. Just like in life, some of the characters started as snots and ended in much the same way. Not everybody grows for the better as they mature. That felt real, and I appreciated the constants as well as the changes across the 10-some years that the series spanned. Aside from Amara, we learn about Tavi, Bernard, Isana, and dozens of others who act as narrators, with Tavi becoming the primary protagonist. They each had unique personalities and interests which felt real. The plot always conveyed what the characters needed to do, even when they got distracted by roadblocks or found new information which turns out everything they thought they knew was wrong. Jimbutcher frequently flexes his writing skills in how these characters interconnect and how they change, such that a character at the beginning of the series will solve a problem completely different at the end. There was plenty of political intrigue filled with double and triple crosses. This was interesting for the first few novels. By the later half of the series, these steady, regular beats no longer come as a surprise, though they're played as such. These predictable events never caused me to lose interest, as the story being told didn't need to rely on twists to make me care. It's difficult not to compare the Codex Alera to the Dresden files, which makes the Codex Alera feel more flawed. None of its points of view were as monumental as Dresden. They all lacked his sass, or the right combination of sarcasm and making up as you go. Some of the characters did feel more reactive than proactive, as though they were being swept downstream during a flood. That's not only a metaphor. There was a point in the story where the team got swept away by a flood, and the subsequent pairings and problems they faced ended up feeling a bit too contrived for my liking. I have one last note before my final thoughts. Don't read the book's titles until you're ready to read them, as they're each spoilers for how the previous one ended. Here are my concluding, spoiler-free thoughts about this series. I'd rate the setting at a 3 out of 5. The geography and world building are intriguing, but felt underutilized. Cough cough, I'll be going into a long explanation on my spoiler-filled review next week about Mount Gyarados. Much of the setting also feels too familiar. There's a race of ice people north of the wall. There's a race of militant tiger people who are like Klingons and like every other anthropomorphic leopards in fantasy stories. The firecrafters are hot-headed, the watercrafters are cool and collected. There are interesting features, but none of it made the setting stand out in my mind. The magic was a 5 out of 5. I normally would include this as a part of setting and world building, though it was applied in such a creative manner that I wanted it to stand on its own. I enjoyed the concept of Furies, but it was how the elements were stretched to the point of breaking or taken to their absolute extremes that was intriguing to me. There were impressive uses of magic systems which were much more than just hurling fire and water at people. I'd rate the characters at a 4 out of 5. I like Amara and wish the series had focused more on her as a centerpiece. As the story shifts to other characters, I lost a lot of my interest. Too many of the main characters fell into fantasy tropes. I also felt that large groups of people had a sameness approach to them, where everybody following the villain was evil or being directly manipulated. In terms of fantasy tropes, Bernard is the strong, cunning woodsman, and Isana is the caring healer and mother figure. There's also plenty of characters who had interesting points and features to them, but then devolved into love interests. I'll keep stating that I enjoy a good love subplot, though here it felt far too forced and detracted from the story in every instance. The villains though, mwah. I was engaged as each of them was created and or evolved across the series. These people tended to be more than one-dimensional evils as they went on a journey from decent to selfish to outright villainy, and there were plenty of villains who redeemed themselves. The villains alone raised this category to a 4. The plot is a 3 out of 5. Again, this feels like a very standard fantasy story. An invading force comes in, the local farmer slash sheep herder needs to rally their friends and family to find the inner power that will allow them to save everyone. There were also a lot of heavy-handed moments in terms of themes, characterizations, and contrivances. Many magic upgrades and power spikes never felt earned. I'll be going through some of these details during my spoiler-filled analysis next week, along with the key lingering questions the series raised but never answered. Overall, I give the Codex Alera a 4 out of 5. I enjoyed reading it, though a lot of the promise to make it outstanding was never delivered, and much of the second half of the series felt too much like a standard fantasy epic. The series had some great payoff moments after books of build-up, and incredible scenes I want to see on the big screen. I am Ben Pick, and thank you for joining me in Running to Write. If you enjoyed my spoiler-free review of the Codex Alera, please press those like and subscribe buttons. Let me know in the comments whether you read the series or want to following this review. Do you agree with my opinions, or is everything I said wrong? I post my running and writing progress on Instagram and Twitter as Running to Write, so be sure to follow me and join in with your own thoughts. Don't forget to sign up for the Running to Write monthly newsletter for regular updates on my story musings, pitfalls, and lessons learned. I've included the link in the description below. You get the first 2 chapters from the second book in the Into the Void series just for signing up. As another bonus for my newsletter, I'll be sending out links to my video outtakes. These are F-bomb laden as I yell at myself to do better, so you've been warned. These outtakes will be incorporated into my Ko-fi page as bonus content and then distributed through my newsletter later. See you next time. Until then, check out the Codex Alera. If you have read it, tell me who your favorite character is in the comments, preferably without spoilers.